Welcome to the Analog Gamers Podcast, a short podcast on board games and board gaming experiences. Here are your hosts.
I'm Shane. And I'm Brent.
And I'm Frank.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming back. This week, we're going to talk about how the life cycle of gaming works. We have with us Eric Dewey, who is a podcaster. He's worked in the gaming industry for a long time. I'm going to have him give his intro. I'm going to let everybody know that Brent is not with us. He is kind of committed to other things, and he decided he would step back, and Eric has been gracious enough to fill in his spot. Eric, why don't you introduce yourself to our couple of dozen listeners?
Well, I want to first thank you for letting me be on your show and talk a little bit. It's always fun to be invited to shows. Having been on the other side of the microphone for quite a bit of time. I am Eric Dewey. You can find me usually on the On Board Games podcast, where we talk about, amazingly enough, board games. You can visit my website at ericdewey.com. There's all kinds of stuff there. Probably the biggest thing is the Big Book of Everything, which is a free life organizer. So you can download it and fill out all that stuff in case, ideally, it's used in case you pass away. Other people know, your passwords and your accounts and all that kind of stuff. But it's also great just while you're still here.
So you have not only podcasted, you guys have been doing On Board Games for 11 years? I think I remember you guys saying recently.
This is our 11th year. Yeah, it's crazy. Of course, the beauty of the podcast is that you just kind of keep going. As long as you can find a good partner who keeps you motivated when you're not motivated,
right?
You can keep it going. But yeah, we've been doing it for 11 years, and it's been a lot of fun, actually. We met amazing people throughout it all, and that's probably the best part of it.
I would imagine. And then before that, you worked, you've got game design work behind you. I think I emailed you. I've seen your name recently when I was looking at some of the old Iron Crown Enterprises stuff.
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of books for Iron Crown, for Rollmaster, for Silent Death. I wrote some stuff for Atlas Games and Wizards of the Coast. I did some Star Wars things for them and a bunch of different kind of, usually on the role-playing side, but occasionally board gaming side as well. And then started getting into published reviews as well. So I wrote for Inquest, I wrote for Knucklebones, pretty much almost any gaming magazine that doesn't exist anymore, which is almost all of them.
Is there a causal relationship to that?
I was going to say correlation does not equal causation, right?
I'm not going to say one way or the other, but.
Okay, so you have, and your show is where I first came across it, you've talked about the life cycle of owning board games. And you say it more graciously than that. But so can you explain what that concept is?
Yeah, I call it the Dewey Gaming Life Cycle, just because we joke that I licked it, so I get to put my name on it. But it's sort of the process that we go through when we sort of get into the gaming industry. And honestly, it works for any kind of thing, but we'll talk about games. So like when you first get introduced to it, you hit that what's called the initialization stage. And that's where you're excited. Your eyes have been opened. You played Catan or Ticket to Ride or whatever game it is that suddenly not roll the die and move on the track. And you're like, oh, this is amazing. And so you just want to kind of learn more about it. And then it's this real steep part of the curve, the acquisition. And that's where you're just buying everything you can get your hands on because, oh, this sounds cool and this sounds cool and this sounds cool. And then at a certain point, you look around and you realize I have got way more games than I ever play, and I don't even like this game anymore. It wasn't as good as I had hoped. And that's when you hit the culling phase, and that's when you start to kind of figure out really what your tastes are, what you like, what you don't like, or what works with your group and what doesn't. And then after you've sort of culled that off, you reach the equilibrium phase, and that's where you're more particular about what goes into your collection. So you look at it and you see, will this fit a need? And if it does fit a need, does it sort of kick out another game that it doesn't fit the need quite as well? So that's the Dewey game collection life cycle.
I've totally lived through that.
All of it? No.
No, I think I have. Probably just 3 months ago, I went through my gaming shelf. I don't have as many as probably you two have. My game shelf and got rid of probably a good 10, 15 games. Now, a lot of those were, games kind of that I brought from childhood or, games that, my mom had bought me.
Like your 15 copies of Monopoly?
My 50 copies of Monopoly. That was a lot of them, I will be honest. So, yeah, I just did that. I totally, you and some other friends really introduced me to board gaming, and I didn't have a huge acquisition phase just because all of you had so many that I was like, I don't even know what to buy.
I don't know. You had a lot of stuff coming in off of Kickstarter.
I did a lot of Kickstarter games. I think partially because I knew nobody else was going to have them in the group or in
true.
either of the two groups I play in. So I thought that was a good way to do that. I found that my acquisition phase didn't really have a natural end. It was like a wife, right? Jenna kind of stepped in and ended that. So Eric, what do you think is the end of that acquisition phase? Do you think, it's kind of natural where players realize like, oh shoot, I have a ton of games I never play. I don't even like most of these games. Or do you think, there are kind of extra other factors like I'm running out of money or my wife's telling me to stop? What do you think usually leads to the end of that phase?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. What is that realization point? So you're going to, in my opinion, you would hit it in one of two places, either a resource constraint, which honestly is usually space. Sometimes it's money, but a lot of times it's just space. You've got games piled up on the floor and you're starting to get the side eye from other people who live in your house. And that's a good hint.
Order.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the other side is when you look at a game, like you're in a game store, this is sort of the epiphany moment. You look at your game store, you look at a game, this looks really cool. I'd love to play it, but I just don't need to own it. And when you sort of reach that point, that's when you've left the acquisition phase, when you realize this is a game that I'd like to play, but not necessarily needs space on my shelf.
Yeah. So I think for me, I don't know where exactly I'm past the acquisition phase.
No,
but I don't get rid of very much.
Frank, I think you go through the whole thing like every 3 months. You go through the whole process again.
Not true. But I noticed probably the thing that said, okay, I really have gotten discriminating about my bias was when, with all that we've heard about terraforming Mars, I said, I have my games kind of grouped by theme. My science fiction games, I don't have any more room on those shelves. And as cool and as wonderful as Terraform, I just want to try it before I buy it.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, where's the space coming from?
Well, the plus side of Terraforming Mars is the box isn't that big.
It's not?
It's not huge. It's certainly smaller than Catan. It's about Catan size, maybe.
Okay.
Not thick, not tall.
Okay.
So Eric, when did
Steampunk Rally size?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what ended your acquisition phase?
What ended my acquisition phase was probably the birth of my daughter, and the reason for that was I had to move a bunch of stuff out of what used to be the game room was going to be the nursery, and so you start hauling all these boxes upstairs, and you're just like, man, I got too much stuff. Yeah. And Tigris and Euphrates, because what was funny was when I got kind of back into board gaming in the early 90s, because I was writing for ICE, they acquired Mayfair, and that was right when Catan hit. So, that all kind of hit all at the same time. And so you were buying, Catan came out, Ticket to Ride came out, Carcassonne, Tigris and Euphrates. I mean, you could buy all the big games because there was only a few of them. But nowadays, I mean, every month there's, Cool Stuff Inc. has like 10 new games a day, right?
Yeah.
Coming in.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, but, it felt like, I got to own Tigris and Euphrates. And while I enjoyed it, it wasn't a game I was pulling out of the shelf to use. And so that was like, I could just get rid of this and then I would have space for something else that I might play. And so, and it goes in waves, I'll accumulate a whole bunch of stuff and get rid of it. And then come back and start finding I've accumulated a whole bunch more again, and then just kind of redo it. Conventions are terrible about that. I mean, usually I only go to BGG Con, but at the end of it, this looks neat, this looks neat, and
yeah.
Then I come home, I was like, why did I buy all this stuff?
So one of the things that I have found, one of the things that kind of woke me up to the fact that I need to slow down was, some wonderful person on Board Game Geek put out this spreadsheet that allows it does a whole lot of different stuff. It will show you number of players, best good with, best with, and it's all done in a spreadsheet. I don't know who did this, but they did a whole lot of work, and I've heavily modified that to suit my needs. But I download my whole collection to that, and when I started realizing, because I'm sorting through these games using all these filters, that I have like 50 unplayed games, and like half of them, I'm not all that excited to even break open the first time. That was when I was like, okay, I'm doing this wrong. I need to think about this a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. But one of the things that sort of, and this was in a recent episode of Onboard Games, we were discussing this kind of an issue, was that, there are some games that you just don't play a lot, but you don't want to get rid of because you have some kind of affection for an attraction to. I've got the old 1980s Civilization game, and
Right.
That's an 8-hour slog, and I can't tell you the last time I played it, but I don't really want to get rid of it because I have some fond memories, and maybe someday we'll all get together and play it again. So
absolutely. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say sort of the Hall of Fame or the retired jersey section of the game collection.
Yeah. I was actually listening to that episode this morning where you guys were talking about that. And what flashed into my mind was, as I mentioned in the email, I just bought the Rollmaster system, basically Rollmaster Classic, which is essentially the second edition.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And because that's the rules that we used back in the 80s when I was playing. And
those are the rules we played with, man. We played it like a decade.
Yeah, we played it for a long time too. And I dropped out because, family and kids, you don't have the time. And now my son's in college. We only have the one. But I thought, now that I have this, I really probably don't need Pathfinder Adventure card game because that was my replacement. That was my RPG-ish
Mm-hmm.
board game to kind of fill that spot. And then I didn't go whole hog into this, but I bought the major couple of pieces of Conan.
Oh, yeah.
One from Monolith.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting here going, well, now that I have this, if I really get into this, I can get rid of those two. No, I'm not getting rid of those two. It's that attachment, right? Part of it is, for me, the IP of Conan. Those whole stories that was a great time in my fantasy exploration. And PAC-G, I put way too much effort into. I printed maps.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Somebody wrote the story. I don't know if you've seen that, but somebody wrote the story, and I've actually considered recording that as an audio with background, sound effect.
Uh-huh.
Play that as you're setting up to kind of tell the story going into it. I've put way too much effort into that to just do it. But you're right. Those attachment, they're ones that are never going to leave my collection.
Yeah, and it's okay. Right.
Yeah,
it's really okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've been gaming long enough to have any of those. I think the only one might be Dune.
I knew you were going to say that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought a copy of Dune because we play it at least once a year in the summer, if not twice in the summer, if we can get around to it.
June is for Dune.
June is for Dune. And I loved this game so much. Like, we played it. I didn't know anything about Dune, but because I thought the variable player powers were so good and just the storyline in the game was so good that I actually went and read all the books, which, lasted months. And I bought my own copy, and I've never actually played my own copy of it. But I still think it was completely worth it. I have it on my shelf. I know that if there's ever unsuspecting friends over that we have 3 hours and they're willing to do it, I can pull that out.
There you go. So while you were reading the Dune books, did they make you thirsty?
Yes.
Because every time when I read them, I was like, man, I'm thirsty all the time. I'm glad it's not just me.
And I think too, because I read them in the summer, I'd sit out on my porch in the summertime and it was so hot and I'm sweating, but I was I feel like I'm there. Such a good experience. Yeah.
I sort of had that experience. We're talking about books now instead of games, but that's okay. I had some of that experience with Lord Fowl's Bane.
Oh yeah. That book is notorious. That series, all of my friends, just when we were growing up in high school, they loved that series. Yeah. And I read the first one and I just couldn't get into it. I was like, I respect it, but I'm walking away.
So it is so, especially the first few chapters are so, they just beat you down.
Exactly.
So I used to read it whenever I was already bummed out, whenever I was in a down period, because in the end, not Kevin Landwaster, the main character, I can't remember what his name was.
Yeah, the leper guy, right?
Yeah. But in the end, he just keeps going through until it turns into something good.
Right.
So I was kind of reteaching myself the lesson. Was that and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy were the two I read when I was bummed.
I tell you, yeah, speaking of, and we'll get back to games, but I reread Hitchhiker's Guide 5 or 6 years ago, the whole series, and I didn't realize how bleak it was because like the longer it goes on, especially the last book, it's just like everything's all falling apart and bleak.
Yeah.
It's like, oh well.
I've been curious as to whether anybody has ever attempted a game based on the Lord Falsbane, the Thomas Covenant. That's the character's name. The Thomas Covenant series.
I don't know. I haven't heard of one. Surely I would have, because my friends, like I said, they love that whole series.
I feel like I need to name drop that Stephen R. Donaldson, the author of these books, went to the college I went to, and I took a writing workshop with him. I did.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
So name drop. But anyway, so Eric, so after the culling phase of this process, you kind of get to the point where you're still purchasing games, but you're really selective about those games that you're purchasing.
Right.
Do you find that you typically go after a certain type of game or certain mechanics? Or what are some of your favorite kind of types of games that you find yourself thinking are worth purchasing?
Or what's the decision criteria? Maybe is the real question.
There you go. So anything with like variable player powers or something like that, I'm instantly going to take a look at, just because that's one of the things I really enjoy. But just in general, games that have kind of buzz. Speaking of Terraforming Mars, I was kind of the same way. I was like, everyone's talking about it. It's hard to get, then I'm just don't need to bother getting it. And I played it once at BGG-Con, and it was fun. I certainly enjoyed it. But it just kept gnawing in the back of my head. I was like, well, maybe I should pick it up. And when it finally became available, I was like, oh, what the heck, I'll get it. So what I'm looking for when I get a game is, does this fit a need that I don't already have? And the beautiful thing of family is that I can often convince myself that, the kids will like this one, so we can play it together, right? And then my son's like, oh, this isn't any good. Like, we got to play it. The Harry Potter Battle at Hogwarts, that happened. I was like, I'll get this. We'll have fun. And we played it 3 or 4 times, but it just got to be a little too hard with 4 players. And my kids were just like, this isn't any fun. I don't want to play anymore.
Now, how old are your kids?
My daughter's 16. My son's 13.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
at the point where they're starting to get their own tastes in games.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, usually it's, does this game fit some sort of need or niche? And, sometimes it can be, I need a game that plays well with 7 players, or, or expansions are kind of sticky about this too. It's like, I already have the game. This expansion kind of looks like it'll be pretty good. So, especially if they can fit inside the box, expansions usually get a pass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times with expansions, I look at and go, but I could, for just a little bit more money, I could buy a whole new experience.
Yeah, true.
Often stops me from buying an expansion.
I've gotten pickier about expansions. It used to be, game expansion, boom, no questions asked. But then I start to look at how does it affect the game? Is it going to do something I don't want it, or I'm not that interested in? So it makes me feel like I'm making a more informed decision when I have these thoughts of, do I really need this expansion?
So with Carcassonne, I'm that way with, I've had people say, what should I get for Carcassonne? And I, which should I worry about getting the big box version? And my answer is, get Carcassonne and Inns and Cathedrals.
There you go.
You're done. Stop.
My recommendation is get Isle of Skye. Then you don't need to worry about decisions made.
I haven't played that one yet. So you experience a lot more games than I do. Of course, you're reviewing. That tends to promote playing a lot of games.
Sometimes it's, we got to play games now.
Oh, no.
Can't play this kind of game again. I gotta play this other one. Is that the case?
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about what games am I looking to purchase, I love all different kinds of mechanics. Eric, I agree with you. I think, what are needs that need to be filled? But I think kind of the end all be all now of that decision is if I have friends over and they pull this game off the shelf, like, what's the probability that I'm going to not want to play it?
Right.
Like, if it's a game that I enjoy, but I don't want to play very often, for me, that game's going to be harder to actually purchase, because I have friends that have games. We have several board game cafes that have popped up in our area that we can go play it at. So if I'm going to be likely not willing to play it, but only play it on special occasions, I'm probably not going to buy that game, because I only have one shelf that I get. So, like, if it's going to go on my one shelf, it's got to be a game that I'm going to be excited about playing every single time it gets pulled off the shelf.
It's got to be shelf worthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he has stuff on his shelves that actually belongs to me that he hasn't returned yet. So
I totally I was gonna bring those back tonight, and then I totally forgot.
That's okay.
So
One of
there's
them's a game you don't even like. So
Well, I've only played it once. We played Merchants and Marauders once.
Oh, I love that game.
it was
Yeah,
a explosion at the table.
The
Big bomb.
session went horribly, and so we shelved it. Shane took it home and played it with a different group of people, and had a really good time with it.
I mean, it wasn't a really good time. It was a good time.
It wasn't Dune.
It wasn't nothing's Dune, but it wasn't Dune, but it was pretty good.
Well, I've always been a huge fan of Sid Meier's Pirates on the computer since the Commodore 64 days, and that game is basically Sid Meier's Pirates, the board game.
So that's actually what blew it up. Is we had one person who was very familiar with that game,
Mhm.
and the other three of us were not at all. We had no clue what we were doing, and rather than kind of help us figure out the game, he kind of
just ran away with it.
ran away
Yeah.
with it, blew somebody out of the water, literally, and it did not go well.
I was going to say there was a big thread on Board Game Geek that somebody was like, what do I do with my huge game collection? I want to, how do I cull it down? And there was all kinds of different, auctions and whatnot. But one person had an interesting suggestion, and they had said, you just give them to other people, like in your game group or whatever. And then they leave your control, but you still have the opportunity to play them.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the response was, well, they always play at my house. They'll just leave them here. So it doesn't really help.
Well, that does happen in our group. We tend to play here at my house.
That is true. Yeah, I do think that's such an interesting way to do it, though, because even when I think about like your collection and my collection, you have games that I absolutely love that really don't get to the table very much at all.
Right.
And I think vice versa. I probably have some games, we even talked about like Power Grid. You're not going to buy it because everybody who you play with has copies.
Yeah.
So I think it should be intuitive, but it's not. Like, give your friends your games. And, if you create this culture of trading games that each other likes, that, I'm going to be more likely to play this at home with my family than you are. But we all will play it in the game group. I think that's such a interesting, and like I said, should be intuitive, but it isn't an intuitive way to really call your collection down.
Yeah. Well, emotions are involved.
Yes.
And those always make decisions difficult.
Yep.
I'm not a very emotional person, so
Oh, really?
yeah.
Is that new? Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about how you kind of go through this and how you look at some of the decisions in terms of what games to buy. But a lot of times when you're first starting out, it's just overwhelming. And I really got back into gaming in 2008, and it was not as overwhelming 10 years ago as it is now.
Yeah, definitely.
As you mentioned, there's just so many games coming out.
Yeah, I actually looked on BGG today, and I think there were over 98,000 games archived on BGG.
Right. And 10 years ago, it was 40, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like half that amount.
That's insane.
So I do want to do, because it's early in this third season, and we're going to talk about how to try before you buy and where you might go to buy some of these games. But just for anybody who is lost, we thought we might go over the 5 kind of must-have games. This does not mean 5 gateway games. It's just 5 games that have really grabbed your attention and you think would have broad appeal. Eric, you probably had a little bit of an effort trying to call that down. But
That is, yes. I had 7, 8, 9, 10 games, and I had to
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Brent's not here, but he did text me his 5. Okay, so I'm going to start by Brent's 5, and I'm just going to list them off. Certainly, we can talk a little bit about the merits of any of these games, but he had...
We're just going to rip his list.
No, I don't know about
this.
that. So he had up front, so these are not in any particular order. He had Star Realms,
Okay.
Settlers of Catan,
Mhm.
Power Grid,
Okay.
Sushi Go,
Okay.
and either Pandemic or Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu.
Okay. I can see that. Yeah, I was just trying to think between Pandemic. Reign of Cthulhu seemed awful specific, but then seems like if you're going to have 5 games, at least one of them should be Cthulhu related in some way, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that. So who wants to go next?
Eric, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to trash Brent's list if you think any of those shouldn't be on there.
Oh, I don't know. When he said up front, I was like, oh, this is going to be an interesting list.
Oh, no. I realized I accidentally tripped on a game name, which I recently got a copy of that, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I was
Like
shocked.
the original one, or
The original one.
because the reprint never happened, right?
So you can go to drive-through cards and order it.
Gotcha.
I don't
Gotcha.
know how that's working in terms of IP, but I got an original one, and I think I paid under 3 digits for it.
Well, there you go. That's good.
I haven't played it yet, but that's one of those games that's a Grail game, so that won't leave my
Yep.
collection probably ever.
Absolutely.
Eric, I'm interested in hearing your list because you're a much more experienced gamer than we are. So I want to see what you came up with.
Okay, so this, and I will explain each of my decisions, but number one has to be Battlestar Galactica. It's my all-time favorite game, and it provides a game experience that just is really, I don't want to say intense, but it really draws you in because you're involved throughout the whole game. It can be long, but I will never part with my copy. The second one I picked is No Thanks. And really, it could be any small card game that you can pull out. But, I mean, the beauty of No Thanks is you can play it with anybody.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever played it?
You just stole one off my list.
Oh, fantastic. I'm going to throw in Catan. I think it's just such a solid, eye-opening Euro game that's real easy to play and is always fun, even if you played it for 10 years. I still enjoy it.
Yeah, when I was thinking about my list, I was like, all right, what are my top 5 that aren't Catan? I was like, because I know, I almost feel like Catan is a given, right? Like that's kind of the cornerstone of a good game collection is Catan.
Yeah.
It's a great place to start. It's a great place to bring people in. It's a great place to just keep playing. You know, when you're with your game group and you're like, we want a game we enjoy, but you know, it's not going to kill us in rules. I think that's such a great. So it's not on my list, but I endorse that too.
Well, it was a toss-up between Catan and Ticket to Ride, and
Yeah.
I enjoy them both, but I honestly play Catan more. So,
Okay.
So I put Pandemic, but really it would be whatever cooperative game I happen to be really into right now.
Uh-huh.
But I definitely think a cooperative game comes into play so easily because you can play with anybody. You don't have to worry. You know, we used to play when my kids were younger. We'd often play cooperative games so that we won or lost together.
Sure.
And it also, I feel, takes a lot of pressure off of people because they don't have to play to if I'm some sort of great gamer, they have to play to my skill level. We're all sort of working together.
Yeah,
Right.
are you, or is that a myth? Everybody says,
No,
Frank,
no.
you know all this stuff about games. I'm like, yeah, but it's a good thing that my enjoyment isn't winning, because otherwise I would have given up this hobby a long time ago.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I have my strengths, but
Yes.
Difference between knowing a lot about games and being able to win games.
Yep, there's a huge difference.
yeah. And I remember one time we were playing with this, it was Don's group. He's my co-host. Back when he was working in ICE, we had this group of people they were playing, and I was visiting them one time. And there was this one guy, we were playing a game, and like 3/4 of the way through it, he's like, I get it. And then bam, 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 he wins. And
Wow.
apparently that was just sort of common, but he had a really good personality about it. So it wasn't like, lording it over. But yeah, they were like, oh, we're all done now. He's figured it out. So the last game, because that's 4, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So the last game I want to pick is One Night Ultimate Werewolf, because again, it's an easy game you can pull out, but it's one of those games that is a complete paradigm shift to everybody who plays it. If they haven't experienced games before. And it's one of those, as soon as you play it, you're like, oh, let's play it again. Let's play it again. And so while it's only 10 minutes, you're going to probably play for an hour and a half because you're going to play it 10 times.
Right. So I had listening to your podcast, I pretty much knew that Battlestar Galactica was going to be on this list. But it's interesting because earlier you mentioned, how some games expansions can take away as much as they add. I'm paraphrasing there.
Right. No, that's true.
But so have you found that, because there's 3 expansions or?
Yeah, 3 expansions, and each one of them has like multiple things within them.
Right. So,
and yeah, it took a while to me to find what I felt was the perfect mix.
okay.
Because we played it over and over again. Sometimes we do this, sometimes we do that. And because we always played it at Board Game Geek. So about 2 Board Game Geek cons ago, we played it, and it was working all right, but I hadn't mixed out some of the stuff before. So there was a little bit of a hiccup there. And so I was like, you know what? When I get home, I'm going to pick exactly what I think needs to be in the game. And that's the way we're going to play it from this point forward. And everything else I can just put away. And so, yeah, that one, I mean, I had to get the expansions because there's new characters with new abilities, right? So,
yes.
I mean, but then on the same token, there's a lot of stuff in those expansions I just don't care for, or make the game longer or add complexity or that doesn't necessarily need to be there. So, yeah, you really have to kind of figure out, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? And sort of figure out what sort of experience you're going for.
I feel like we have a whole nother episode here to talk about expansions and like what are the best expansions to games? What are ones that are really not as fantastic? And
probably at some point in time, yes.
All right, Frank, what was your list?
So my list.
He was about to ask me, and I got to it first.
Yes, so that's exactly what happened. So my list is, I gotta scroll down. So I did not pick Ticket to Ride or Settlers of Catan. I picked Carcassonne for that for a couple reasons. One's kind of personal. It's one of my wife's favorite games. But I also think that's a game, one of the rare games that plays really well at 2 and plays really well at 4 or 5. And it's a very different game depending on the player count. In fact, if we're playing 2-player, I probably win more than half of the time. And if you add a third person or more, my win rate automatically goes down to like 10% because I can't figure out. Once I get ahead, it's kind of a zero. You just got to keep that differential with 2 people. But
right.
When you get 3 people, that's a lot harder to do.
The math gets complex.
Yes, it does. So that's one, Carcassonne. Another one is Acquire. Acquire is a game that I actually tracked down a 1999 version of because I love that game so much. That, for those of you who aren't familiar, that is kind of that version is the one to have. It's a little bit more glossy and it's hard to track down, and I found one and immediately got it.
Yeah, that is a great game. It's one of the games I love and I just am terrible at. But it's still a lot of fun.
I think I've won once out of like 20 times, and I know what to do, but it is very hard to execute.
Yeah, because you got to give up what you're building.
Yes.
And that's the part I struggle with. Because I'm making it so big, but you're going to have no money to buy anything else.
That's right.
So I've never played that, but I think, Frank, at least 85% of the conversations we have about board games, you talk about Acquire. So
I probably talk about Acquire as much as you do Dune.
Probably. So that's not a surprise.
Or maybe Monopoly.
All right. What else you got?
So Hive.
Okay.
2-player game. That was such a hit in our scout troop. I think I brought it one year, and by about a year later, we had 5 copies that would go on campouts because everybody went out and bought it. We actually had a Hive tournament on one campout one time. It was a whole lot of fun.
And that is such a perfect game for camping because it's just those pieces are heavy enough they're not going to get blown around, but there's no board or cards or any of that. That is a solid choice.
Well, and if the pieces get dirty, they're super easy to clean. It's not like...
It's true, yeah.
I mean, you can knock them around, drop them in the mud, and still...
So you stole my idea with No Thanks, and you made the comment about One Night Ultimate Werewolf that you can just kind of... You're done in 10 minutes and people say, let's play it again, do it again. And that's probably been my biggest experience of No Thanks, which it only plays up to 5. We've pushed it to 6. It was a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, everybody, the people sitting at the table, they weren't gamers. This was not their primary hobby. And so they kept saying, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And I think we played for No Thanks for a solid 2 hours, just over and over again. And it works. I think it just works really well.
There's something real addictive about that push your luck part of the game, right?
Yes. Yeah, it really is. Or I know because this guy doesn't have any chips. He can't say have it. He's going to get stuck taking this card.
Yep.
Let it ride to them. And then the last one would be Codenames. I am not.
Great choice. Yeah.
I am not typically a party game kind of guy. I think my experience with a lot of games like Headbands and some of those kinds of games is the rules aren't tightly written enough And so I get frustrated with things like somebody's headband says Ebenezer Scrooge and somebody says, was it a person? And my response is no, because it's a character.
It's a character, not a person.
Not a person. Somebody else answers, yeah. Well, what is it? It's not defined in the rules. Drives me nuts.
You're an engineer, aren't you?
Yes, I am. So, Codenames hits that really, really well. I mean, the only thing I think when I've played it that I've had to say, wait, that's, you got to watch the rules here, is when they give nonverbal
nods or shake their heads,
which is just, it's not intentional at all. It's just the way they normally converse. And
yeah, I think Codenames is a fantastic choice. That was like number 6 on my list, so it didn't hit 5. I got a copy of Codenames and Codenames Pictures for Christmas from my mother-in-law this year, and Jen and I just went up to visit my parents for Easter, and I took Codenames. I was like, Mom, we got to play this game, because I grew up playing Taboo, Headbands, like you said, all those kind of word association games. And, she goes, I hate your games. They don't make any sense. And I was like, no, you have to try this one. And we must have played it 6-7 times straight because she just enjoyed it so much. And my aunt who was playing, she was like, all right, look it up. Where can I buy this? And so she had me like looking where she could go get it the next day so that she could take it and play it with her family. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic choice. Do you want me to share my list, or?
I suppose that's true, isn't it?
Happens every time.
Does not.
All right. So Eric, I actually had several similar reasonings as some of your games. So you had the One Night Ultimate Werewolf. I picked the Resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I play the Resistance a lot with my youth group kids, and we rebrand it just a little bit, but they go nuts for that game. And the great thing is, like, we've played it in the car on the way to a retreat.
Oh, that is so cool.
You don't have to have anything to write down. You just got to remember. I mean, at its core, it's a best 3 out of 5 game.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can count to 5 and keep track of that, you can play pretty much anywhere. So for me, the Resistance. You said like the co-op, and you had also talked about how you like variable player power. So one of my picks was Forbidden Island.
Great. And
again, that's a game that has that little bit of variable player power. It's co-op. And I like it because you can pull it off the shelf 15 minutes. I think it's a great little game.
Yeah. Another
one that I picked, Frank, you talked about high for 2 players. Brent had picked Star Realms. For me, I picked Seven Wonders Duel.
Oh, yeah.
My wife always jokes with me that one of my famous sayings is, Jenna, want to play a game? And that's one that she never hates playing. So, she'll say, well, what do you want to play? And I know that means like, all right, I have to pick the right game if we're going to play one. Like, it's kind of a trap. But Seven Wonders Duel I think it's a great 2-player adaptation of Seven Wonders. I picked Tsuro. Yeah. I've only played it a few times. I don't actually own it. Frank, you have a copy that we've played. One of the reasons I love it is it's a rare tabletop game that supports a lot of players. How many does it play up to? 8. I don't know many other tabletop games, not what I would say are party games, that support 8 that, 1, aren't super long, and 2, are pretty enjoyed by everybody at the table.
Yeah, it's so elegant, too. It's really easy to understand, and then you just kind of sit back and enjoy there's always, for whenever I play, it's always kind of a peaceful feeling while you're trying to go through it.
It's surprisingly so, yes.
Yeah.
I feel very neurotic playing the game. I played it about 5 times. I think 4 of the 5, I threw myself off the board. It wasn't somebody else's doing, so. And then the last game I picked was King of Tokyo.
Oh, yeah. Good.
Eric, you talked about Battlestar Galactica and how you just love that story and that theme and that game. For me, I grew up and, on the weekends, my dad would put Godzilla on. And even now, like, I'll call him and he'll be like, you won't believe what I'm watching on the news. And I'll be like, what? And he's like, a giant lizard is attacking the board. I'm like, Dad, what? That's not the news. That's an old movie. So part of that is I just love the theme of it. And then I talked about last year, the end of 2017, about how I got the game for my nephews who are 5 and 3, or 6 and 4 now. And Frankie, your suggestion, I just took out all of the keep cards and just kept the discard cards, and they got it. Like, after one play, they could play it and they got it. And so I think that's just such a fun game to play with kids. They loved all the little monsters. And, Eric, you talked about how co-op was good for kids. They also loved like attacking each other.
Yeah.
For them. And we had some great teaching moments of like, there's no crying in board games.
And what's great in that game is that you don't pick who you're attacking, right? You're forced to attack either everybody or the guy in the center. So I think that helps deflect some of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I do think King of New York is a better game, but I think King of Tokyo is more accessible to more people. So that's why I picked King of Tokyo over King of New York.
Cool. So we've been going now for a while, and we'll start wrapping this up. So, Eric, where can you be found again on the web? And do you have any parting shots of wisdom when it comes to playing games, even for us? Because I'm sure your collection is probably 5 times as big as mine, and I'm sure that you've got at least played 5 times the number of games I play.
I may have played them then, yeah. No, it's just there's always a good time to play a game, right?
Yes.
That's the biggest wisdom I have, right?
Yeah. So that, you say that, and it's funny because Shane was telling the story about taking the Resistance on trips, and I took before One Night Ultimate Werewolf came out. My son's 8th grade trip, we went to DC, and then went to Gettysburg, and then we're coming back, and all the teachers rolled their eyes because I'm one of the few parents on the bus, and I pull out Werewolf, and finally I said, "Okay, kids, we're going to put this away." And they're like, "What? What are we putting it away for?" I said, "Because this is our exit. We're almost back home." And they said, "Really? We've been playing Werewolf for 5.5 hours."
Oh, wow.
Just one game after another.
Yeah.
And almost had everybody on the bus playing at some point in time during that period. So, yeah, there's a circumstance. There's a game that'll fit almost any circumstance.
Yeah, and it's a shared experience, and and that's always a lot of fun.
Right.
Frank, why don't you ever ask me for wisdom?
I do.
If y'all could have seen the look he just gave me. If I was
Yours is about TV shows, right? We came to talk to you about Supernatural.
That's true. If I was going to impart wisdom to the people listening, because we're talking about buying games and what games you're doing, don't be ashamed of the games you love.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
That's true.
You've been ragged on a little bit this episode for having Monopoly, but I still enjoy playing Monopoly.
It depends on who's at the table. That's the big thing for me.
So there's history on the Monopoly thing. There's a story behind that, right? But I tell people when they start ragging on Monopoly, I tell them, look, free parking doesn't get you money.
If you play by the rules.
Well, with one exception, right? And you auction, right? That's
right.
a big rule.
Yep.
And the other thing I tell them is the only house rule I have is that when the first person goes out, the game's over.
Mm-hmm.
And you count your money, whoever. You're talking about an 1.5 hour game. That's not bad.
Right, exactly.
So, Eric, thank you for being with us today and filling in, exceeding all of us as a podcaster. Our listeners, thank you for listening. Thanks for listening every single week. We hope you enjoy season 3. Check up Eric. Look him up. He gave us his website and his podcasts, so definitely go check them out. And as always, play games, have fun, and just love the hobby.
I want to thank you guys for having me on. This has been a lot of fun, and I have to say, anybody who has a Larry Boy in the background is a great group of guys.
Yep. I have a Larry Boy tie, as a matter of fact.
Well, fantastic.
That's fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please spread the word about our podcast, which can be found at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. Our intro and outro are recorded by Daniel Feldman. Logo artwork provided by Tabitha Jordan Nichols. The Analog Gamers Podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 4.0 license.